Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri, and I'm joined today with a very special guest, brand new guest, someone I think you're going to really enjoy. His name is Stuart Englert, and he's written the book Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History. He has a 30-year-long career in media and publishing and financial markets, just analyzing and discussing the markets. And this book was a collaboration with a group that you're very familiar with, the Gold Antitrust Committee, GATA, Bill Murphy and Chris Powell, and really exposing what is going on in the financial markets, the manipulation of precious metals. And Stuart does a really good job of going through and exposing this. And in fact, every sale that takes place with the book, 10% of the proceeds actually goes to GATA. So when you support the book, you're actually supporting GATA. So we're going to be discussing the markets. What is rigged? So without any further ado, Stuart, thanks for coming on Crush the Street with me today.
Take the invitation, Kenneth. Look forward to chatting with you here.
Well, let's talk about the book Rigged. What is rigged? I'm going to start you off simple here.
Well, I came at this. Are you familiar with the organization, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee?
Yes, sir.
Bill Murphy and Chris Powell started this organization back in 1999. And I've been following their website, GATA.org, I think it is, or is it .com? I can't remember, for 10 to 12 years. And I've been reading about manipulation, intervention in the precious metals market and suppression of gold and silver prices on that website for years. And I was always curious about it. My background is that, you know, I'm a trained journalist. I was in the media for 30 years. I was a reporter, editor, writer on newspapers and magazines. And about 6 years ago, I got into publishing books. I think it was about a year and a half ago, I went to Chris Powell, who's Secretary Treasurer of GATA, and asked him if he'd be interested in writing a book about this, you know, the market manipulation, the suppression of gold and silver. He said he was busy at the time. So last fall, I had some
famous
time.
Last words. He was busy.
last fall, I had some time. And I delved into GATA's archives. They have a pretty extensive archive of documents, you know, records, some of it declassified information that proves that the precious metal markets have been rigged for a long time. Going back to the 60s, at least, with the London Gold Pool, if you're familiar with that. So I delved in, and I was somewhat of a skeptic at first. I kind of wanted to prove to myself that the markets were rigged. You know, I wanted to see the evidence. And what I did was I tried to extract the most pertinent information, the details that I saw. And by the way, these documents are voluminous, and it's a slog to read through them and try and put it together. But that's what I did. I tried to meld it together in an easy to read and understand book for the novice. There's a lot of people that have written about manipulation in the markets before, but it's usually over the heads of the average person. And I had in mind, you know, somebody that's not familiar with the monetary system and precious metals market when I wrote the book. And that's who I tried to write it for, everybody, so that they can understand what's going on with the monetary system, with our currency, and how the markets are rigged.
Well, thank you for doing that. And yeah, absolutely, we're good friends with Chris Powell and Bill Murphy. We've interviewed them plenty of times here at Crush the Street, met them at conferences. And this is something that is just a fascinating topic. It's frustrating too, right? You know, these miners have to mine metal with blood, sweat, and tears to sell their metal into the markets for, you know, a fraction of what they should be getting. So I'd like you to go into what's the moral issue with the rigging of the precious metals market? Like who gets hurt when you have this manipulated price? Like, I think a lot of people might not have the context or understand, what does it matter if silver trades for $15, or what does it matter if gold trades for $1,200, $1,300? Like, why? Who cares, right?
Right. Well, I came at this from the debt perspective. Since the 1980s, when Ross Perot was talking about the national debt, I've been concerned about this. I didn't understand how the system worked, where the government could keep growing, expanding these deficits and debt, and I was curious about that. Plus, I'm a libertarian. I believe in sound money and free markets, and I learned a lot about that from Ron Paul. And as I delved into this, I said, there's nothing free about these markets. There's nothing sound about our money. It's created out of thin air, and the people that benefit are the people that manipulate it, the banks. The rest of us are hurt by it. Our purchasing power of the currency goes down. And, I try to explain that in this book, that it's not in the best interest of every person to have rigged markets and unsound money. And it's deception, it's dishonesty, and it usually benefits the elites and the banks that profit off the manipulation.
Stuart, it's an interesting thing to listen to Jerome Powell. On Sunday, he did an interview, and he's quoted by saying, "The one thing I can absolutely guarantee is that the Federal Reserve will be doing everything we can to support the people we serve." And it's an interesting question. I mean, it sounds like it's for the people, by the people, of the people. But when you peel back the onion a little bit, we know that the Federal Reserve serves the banks and the ultra wealthy when it's all said and done. I mean, look what happened over the last couple months with the stock market falling, the ultra wealthy losing trillions of dollars in asset valuation. The Fed comes in, prints trillions of dollars, and their wealth comes back. Meanwhile, everyone else gets a $1,200 check and can feel like they got something from the government, but really trillions of dollars have been supported in the form of money printing by the Fed, and it's for the bank. So it's a real question here. Who is the Fed serving under this environment? And it's like Gerald Celente says, Federal Reserve is as federal as Federal Express. What are your thoughts?
Kenneth, I watched Jerome Powell's interview on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley on Sunday. And his remarks, as far as I'm concerned, were both ridiculous and hilarious in a way, and sad, I guess, at the same time. He kept talking about the tools that they have, and they have all these additional tools. The only real tools the Federal Reserve has is to create more debt and devalue our currency even further. That's the only tools they have in the tool bag. And as I understood what he was saying, he was calling for Congress to spend more, to borrow more money, so that the Fed could create more of this increasingly worthless. It's not even money; it's a currency. It's debt, if you will. And I had to laugh at much of what he's saying. I shook my head throughout most of the interview, because I think a lot of people think he's acting in our best interest. And he is not. The Federal Reserve is not acting in our best interest. And I know it because he's trying to deceive us with what he's saying.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I know you said you're a libertarian, and I am too. But to the degree that we saw President Trump, break through and actually win the 2016 election, despite the media against him, and I guess to the outsider that he is, how much of a breakout from this rigged system would you say that was? And of course, I know there's a lot to criticize him on, but to the degree that we can talk about, hey, is there any sort of ground that the people are making when it comes to just exposing, the lies from the media, the lies from the financial system. Are we making any ground on this?
Well, I was hopeful when Trump was elected, even though I didn't vote for him or Hillary Clinton. But I've been disappointed in that area. I was hoping that he would do more to end the rigging of the system. Now, as we know, some people in his Justice Department have rattled some cages over at J.P. Morgan and charged some traders with spoofing and manipulating the markets. But sadly, I'm not seeing anything coming out of that. One of J.P. Morgan's traders, I think his name is John Edmonds, which was charged back in 2018, I think it was, pled guilty to rigging the markets, manipulating the precious metal markets, and yet he hasn't even been sentenced yet. Now we've been told that he's cooperating with the investigators, but I've been very disappointed that that the prosecution, investigation and prosecution of these rigged markets hasn't gone further, and we've seen very little action out of the CFTC as well in regulating and investigating these rigged markets.
So what do you make of the move we've seen in gold and silver as of late in 2020 here as a response to the coronavirus, the crashes that we've seen? Markets have crashed down, but we have to acknowledge that they're recovering against all of this Federal Reserve monetary printing, government stimulus, checks out to the people. It's inflating the stock market once again. But we are seeing a much higher gold price. $1,750 gold is a lot higher than $1,200 or $1,300 gold that we got used to over the last few years.
Yeah, the volatility in the markets is telling us something is amiss, if you will. Something's wrong. Particularly the disconnect between the spot price of gold and silver, the futures price, and then the retail price. The divergence in those are telling me that something's wrong. We shouldn't have this disparity at all between the metal prices. And I think the prices should be going up. The prices certainly should be going up on both gold and silver as safe havens because of this enormous debt, additional debt that the federal government is taking on and that the Federal Reserve is monetizing. I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars, 3 trillion, 6 trillion. Who knows? This could end up being $8 trillion that the Federal Reserve creates out of thin air, and that should cause gold and silver prices to increase.
So as far as manipulation, upside potential, what's manipulated more? Do you tend to favor silver in this environment, or are you equally into gold and silver?
Well, I'll say this. I am not a market analyst or chart reader. I rely on the experts on that subject. But I tend to agree with Ted Butler, who is quoted in my book, Rigged, that silver is the most manipulated commodity in the world by far. And so, I think I've long been a silver bug. I bought my first Morgan dollar back in the 70s, and I gave it as a gift to my mother. She was an amateur coin collector. So I have silver hair. So, I'm a silver bug, I guess. And silver is poor man's gold. It's what everybody can afford. It's still at a price that the average person can get a few ounces of silver. Where gold, that's out of the reach of most indebted Americans at $1,700 an ounce. So I think silver has the greatest potential at this point in terms of rising price.
I know you said you leave it to market analysts, but what's your instinct when it comes to what's happening in stocks and, it reacting to, is there a vaccine in place or or there's all this trillions of dollars getting thrown at the system. I mean, there's a lot of people that are only making it because they got a $1,200 check plus, their dependents and, whatever else they might have received, unemployment, maybe making more on unemployment than they were at their minimum wage job. They're stringing this along with some Band-Aids here, but I mean, are you concerned about the fallout when this attempts to get back to, the economy we had maybe a couple months ago when, money wasn't just being printed the way it is right now?
Well, Kenneth, you're well aware that we went from the everything bubble to now the everybody bailout. I mean, that's the way I see it. The debt that is being put on now can never be repaid. There's no way it can be repaid. So, but the powers that be are trying to reinflate the markets, okay, reinflate this debt bubble, to make it appear that everything's fine and dandy, that there's no problems, trying to instill confidence, I think, in the public. But we know that is an illusion. The market prices, the stock market prices, I think, are overinflated based on the fundamentals. And I think it's all this funny money that the Federal Reserve is creating that they're dumping in to create this illusion. And that's part of the rigging, if you will. That's part of the manipulation, not only of the markets, but of people's minds, I think.
And I'm not sure if this is something you're comfortable talking about, but I mean, what are your thoughts on what we're seeing with this coronavirus? And I'm hesitant to even say that. I don't normally just use the word virus because of what's going on with censorship and whatnot. But what is your thoughts when it comes to what we're hearing from the mainstream? I mean, to you, and it's hard because I think we all took it very seriously at first. And we said, hey, we need to be very careful with this. And I'm not saying that we just go back to normal completely and ignore the risk of the virus, but I just have a hard time believing that it was as bad as we were led to believe. And now it's become such a political issue between, Democrats really wanting to keep this economy shut down and scare people, and, conservatives trying to get people back to work. And now it's become like a dividing focal point for people who have their initial biases on, where they lean. But when it comes to rigged systems, manipulation, controlling of the people, I mean, it just seems such an odd dynamic what we're seeing right now. The hydroxychloroquine drug, I mean, there's so much evidence of it working. And it's so odd how the mainstream media treats this like, it's a loony bin drug when there's so many facts out there, and there's this avoidance of the path of least resistance to help people, and then obviously you can go down the vaccine rabbit hole. And I'm not even against a vaccine, but it's just, it leads me to believe and more evidence of how much control and manipulation of the narrative there are to push an agenda across. And I know a lot of people need to make their own conclusions on things, but there's just this rigged system. Again, it's across the board. And I just, being that you're very well versed, you read a lot, what is your sentiment on what's going on in this big picture?
Right. Well, Kenneth, I'm a skeptic by nature. Okay. And when this thing broke, I really didn't know what to think. But I was asking myself questions. Is this thing valid, or is our response and reaction appropriate? And after being in the media for 30 years, I saw how the media was presented in this. And I don't trust the media. I was in it. I think everyone should question what they hear, see, and read. And I could see that they were hyping this and blowing it out of proportion. The numbers of deaths weren't valid, or weren't justifying or warranting, as far as I'm concerned, the shutdown of the entire economy, the lockdown. It just didn't make sense to me. As things have unfolded, I'm even more skeptical. I don't think that the true crisis is the virus. It's the fear and the hysteria that's been created. And that makes me ask, why? Why are we being conditioned? It's like we're being socially conditioned now to fear one another, to fear the virus. And I question it all. And I don't believe everything I'm being told, that's for sure. The official story just doesn't stack up for me. I'm not saying there's not a virus. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's something that's killing people. But it just doesn't seem, one thing that I agree with Trump is I think the cure that's been presented may be worse than the disease.
Yeah. I think it's hard for a lot of people to, and this is very extreme, but hard to wrap their minds around how a whole entire nation can enslave and capture and kill and go through a mass genocide of a population. I'm talking about, Nazi Germany and what happened to, the Jews at the time and in Europe. And it's mind-boggling how that could take place. But I was talking to my wife yesterday and I'm like, wow, it's amazing what fear can do to an entire society, and how you can start to brainwash people. And I can understand how you can get to a point where it just gets so conditioned, so, blinded to things, to get to a point where you're just doing ridiculous things because that's what the government is telling you to do. And I think, like what you're saying, and I know that was a little bit extreme, what happened in Nazi Germany, but I mean, who knows where this could go? I mean, if we see some extreme economic problems, starvation, people losing their homes and all these different things, who knows what people will sign up for as a response for their own personal safety, their well-being, their health, right? And
Right.
I'll let you respond to that.
Well, fear can be paralyzing to some. There's a big debate going on in people's minds right now, and in society at large. What is more important? Is it public safety and security? Is it our health security, or is it freedom and independence and liberty? And that's where we're dividing now. And I'm hoping we understand that liberty, our personal liberty, must be more important than our security. If we give up our liberties, we'll lose everything, our way of life. And I think that one way to control people is to make them desperate, to put them in a condition where they're impoverished, where they're begging for the government to do something. And we've seen this in the past. In fact, back to the gold and silver issue during the Great Depression, I guess you're well aware of this. In 1933, in the midst of the Great Depression, President Roosevelt ordered Americans to surrender their gold to the banks so he could reset the price and devalue the dollar against gold. And that was a currency and monetary intervention and manipulation, which effectively abolished gold as legal tender in the United States, even though it's in the Constitution. So people were coerced, if you would, because they were in the midst, they were desperate, right? They were jobless. Many were hungry, standing in soup lines. So that was done under desperation. People were willing to give up their money as gold, I should say gold as money, because they wanted to improve things. They wanted to change things. They wanted to make things better. But in doing that, we got away from sound money. So it was done under duress. Does that make sense?
It does. And, when I think about, the things that you're talking about, sound money, the Federal Reserve, so much of this takes context for people to understand. And I feel like, Trump understands a lot more than, he may lead us to believe, or, he understands that there's a lot of things that are rigged, but there's a problem with him being able to communicate to the entire population, the entire world, because a lot of what people need to understand takes context. And like Ron Paul, I loved Ron Paul. I went to his rallies. I was kind of hopeful that he would have a chance to maybe catch some viralness and win. But I feel like it was hard for people to connect with him because they don't understand the context of what he's talking about. It takes a deeper level of understanding for it to even make sense as to why they should care about some of these certain things. And I think that's the dynamic of why it's so difficult to manage an economy with, people, people vote, they vote what they need, they vote what they think they want, and all these different things, but it may not line up with sound principles that are fundamentally beneficial and incentivize economic growth. And that's just the problem with, essentially our democracy and trying to contain what is left of capitalism in our world. So, maybe you can comment on that.
Well, I'm a big fan of Ron Paul. He taught me so much. But in many ways, one of the reasons I think he didn't get traction is because he speaks about issues that are over the heads of many people. When you talk about monetary policy and the Federal Reserve, a lot of people's eyes just kind of glaze over, and they can't grasp it. They can't understand it. And I understand that myself, because I wrote this book, Rigged, and I tried to communicate at the simplest level that I could, but it's very challenging to translate a complex, complicated issue like the financial system or the monetary markets into something that the average person can grasp and understand. And that's the big challenge. It takes a great communicator to take a very complex subject and translate it for the masses of people. But I'm truly convinced, Kenneth, that the best way to end the rigging of the markets is to educate people about the system and how corrupt it is. And I think the more people that understand it, the less likely that this fraudulent financial system can continue.
Well, it's a much easier to stand up there and give people cell phones and pay their bills and say they're going to get monthly checks from the government. I think that's a lot more easier to understand for people than sound money and Federal Reserve and saving their money and higher interest rates. If that's more sound to people, not this negative interest rate environment, 0% on your 30-year mortgage and all these different things that sound good and tickle the ears of, somebody who just doesn't really understand the long-term implications of this. And it's a difficult thing. And that's why it's important for us to act prudently ourselves in this environment. And also if we can get that education out there. So I highly recommend people check out the book. If you enjoyed this interview with Stuart Englert, check out the book. We'll have the links in the description area. Stuart, if people want to learn more about you, the work you're doing, the books you've written, please let them know where they can go and what they can expect to find.
Sure. Well, all my books are available on Amazon by looking up my name, Stuart Englert, Englert. And I've also written an allegorical novel series about the issues we talked about today, the grand debate between liberty and security. And I also tie in the monetary system in this allegorical trilogy called Paradox. And but if people want to contact me personally for a signed copy, they can write to me at my email, srenglert, Englert, @comcast.net. And I'll get them a copy. If they live in the United States, I found out it's cost prohibitive to ship these books overseas because of postal rates and foreign exchange rates. But if you live in the United States, I can get you a signed copy if you email me.
Well, thanks for doing that, Stuart. We'll definitely link that in the description area. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Kenneth. Thanks for the invite.